And I'll see that, which is wonderful. Thank you. And here we go. Well, welcome again to another Monday Mornings with Master Wall with Grant and Brian. I am Brian.
And I am Grant.
And we are here to bring you the top-notch education and entertainment and engagement within our world of stucco and eaves. As always, please email Grant and or myself for questions, comments, thoughts, and ideas, and we will try to do our best to get back to you and have them on the show. Today, we have a great guest, Mark Fowler, Executive Director with the SMA, Stucco Manufacturers Association. We figured have EMA last week and do SMA this week. He is the editor-director of Walls and Seals Magazine since 2007. He is also involved heavily with the terrazzo industry as well as the SMA director, as you see there. He's been a plastering contractor in his past. That's kind of what he grew up doing with his dad. And he's authored the first 3 editions of the Stucco Resource Guide, and then many technical papers as well, kind of where I had gotten a lot of my information when it came to stucco processes and things like that in the beginning. Also been an expert witness in many things. And so we welcome to the show, Mark. We thank you for coming. I'll just kind of introduce like I did with that and start off with kind of just whatever you want, but then tying into stucco. And one of the questions from our conversation last week that I thought was really good to start is stucco dead? It's something somebody had asked you. I know that internally, Grant and I, we talk about this a lot when it comes, is stucco dead? And why would you say why or why not? But welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Brian and Grant. Thank you for having me on. I've really been looking forward to this. This is great. And I really do appreciate Masterwall being a member of the SMA and supporting, our SMA group. Real quickly, the SMA, we've been around since 1957. Even though it is the Stucco Manufacturers Association, we do have contractor members, dealer members, and consultant members. And we've sort of been around for a long time. I've been director for 5 years now here. And we are I guess we're a national association, even though I'm based out of California. We've got members all over the United States, from Florida, Texas. In fact, my terrazzo office is in Texas. So I'm back and forth between here and Texas, not so much right now. Your question on whether is stucco dead, that's kind of funny. I would say no, it's not. It's definitely not dead. In fact, there's a stucco market study, if anybody wanted to read about that's on the SMA website. I published that one in 2016, the first version. And the reason I did that was because I got a report from the University of Kentucky, which took US Census data that showed that stucco, and still is around 20 to 25% of the market of all new homes are built with stucco. Now, and we got to give eaves its fair due on that, because when it says stucco, these people are just checking off the box stucco. Yeah. There's not a checkbox for eaves or one coat or whatever. So they're calling everything stucco. I acknowledge that. And we know that. And by the way, I've got no problem with eaves. Eaves is a great product. We know that. So, but that's what it is. And as far as it, I know that I've been involved with this now for the last 3 or 4 years on the market share. And what really made me look at this was because I know that some areas are having a loss in market share, and some areas are actually still growing in market share. And that was sort of why I wanted to write that report in 2016, and then I updated it again in 2019. And by the way, it's free. Anybody can go on the Stucco Manufacturers Association website. It's right there. You can download it. I know I probably get a phone call a month from some marketing person that wants to talk about it. And the reason what I did was I didn't just take the market data from the US Census Bureau and from the University of Kentucky, which continually does these reports. They asked a question in their report. They didn't understand why stucco was regional. They made some false assumptions, thinking, well, it's only good in hot weather, which is not true. And when I read that, I thought, I can explain some of these reasons. I can explain why stucco's hot in one area and maybe not so much in another. It can be a little bit complicated, but then again, maybe not, because here in Southern California, where I'm located, and I was born and raised, even though I did live in the Northwest for quite a while, it's because we use a lot of these pumps to pump plaster with here. And
Mm-hmm.
and there's these big machines, and that's where you get these tracks of homes that come in, and these guys, and I grew up doing that work, by the way. I ran gun crews. That was part of my job. My dad, I think at our biggest, we were running about 250 guys. We ran 5 guns, and the amount of volume we put out, I just thought that was normal. Like, that's what you do. You come out, we get these houses that are, I think the biggest tract of homes I ever did was, I can remember one top was 350 homes at one time. That's a lot of house, and we're not talking little houses. They're big 2-story homes. Well, what happens is when you do that, the price for the installed price for stucco really plummets. I mean, and that's why it can beat hardy siding. It can be around here. You can't get anything done less expensive, more economical. And when you have something that's a proven track record, just people around here go, I got stucco house, I got no problem, so don't worry about it. They're happy with it. And I know that price can be, the price here, it can get as low as $3 a square foot, which, by the way, we actually use the yard measurement here, so it's really about $25 a yard is not uncommon for track work. And
Right.
when you get into custom homes, it goes up, of course, and the add-ons and everything like that. So I think that's why it's still big here.
Yep.
And because we don't have a lot of rain and everything like that, so we don't have some of the issues, even though I think flashing is still done pretty well by guys that do it on a regular basis.
And that's really interesting you say it that way, because to me, it's one of those things where, like you said, there's a piece of it as you migrate from the United States, right? You go from the Southwest going towards the Northeast, very different in every way of how things are done. And the flashing piece of that is a huge part. Now, I know we talked about this as well when it came to the water and stucco, right? I mean, everybody says, and that's the damages and the problems and everything that we face. We had York Flashing come on a couple of weeks ago, talking about water mitigation, things like that. And this is, again, still one of those biggest pieces is the water that comes through. It's not always so much water as much as it is air in the realities of that. But and why we've seen failures within stucco, right? And stone for that matter, because really stone is stucco in the sense it just has a, what'd you call, George Stubrick, right? He calls it, what does he call that? We said this last week.
Oh, lumpy stucco.
Lumpy stucco, right? Stonework is lumpy stucco because it's just that. But that's one of the biggest things that you've talked about too when it comes to water and really the mitigation of water, the flashing details, how that education, and I do want to tie that to why the SMA is so important for us, because it is an educational resource for us. And specifically the details that you put out in the resource guide is one of those key parts, right? It shows how do we treat flashings, terminations, the systems themselves. Do you still see water intrusion as a big issue within the market?
Oh, absolutely, I do. And I want to make it clear when I say I see it as a big issue, it's not that I see it's not that I really see that many problems as much as it gets blown. There was a time when there were a lot of problems. And I think a lot of guys have done a lot better job at doing these things. We've had a lot of advancement on education, so it's gotten better. But we're still running into some of the issues, and certainly some of the flyback, the slap back on it, or whatever you want to call it. And when you mentioned Stebrook, Dr. Joe Stebrook, he's considered to be, I wouldn't expect you to be able to know him. He's probably the nation's preeminent building science expert. I'm sure there's some guys whose names on here I know, they probably know who he is. And what I mean that is he's a doctor, he's from MIT. He actually is very intelligent. He's also very entertaining. He does great presentations, and he knows building science. I mean, he can talk about the vapor drive and transmission, and he gets into the real science of it. And the reason I want to bring that up is, and I like him. I know him personally. He knows me. We talk on the phone every once in a while. We argue on the phone. And
there you go.
But he's one of these, he's a scientist. And this is sort of the problem. We get a lot of these science guys, they look at the stucco, and I cannot tell you, Brian, how many times I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I've been involved in a lot of litigation. I've been in courtrooms. I've been in I tear apart buildings all the time. I worked as an architect for a while doing building envelope investigations for an architecture firm that did it. And it's amazing how they make such a science out of it. And I'm not saying there isn't science involved and you got to look at it, but I keep going, when most of the leaks, the vast majority of the leaks that I find are somebody in this field made a mistake.
Yeah.
We talked about it last week, and I told you, in fact, I sit on the ASTM committee for lath and for plaster. It's 1063 and 926. And I remember I asked the group, I said, and we keep coming up with these scientific solutions, and we keep trying to reinvent the wheel, yet every time we go out on a job site, when I can get them to go out to a job site with me, which that's another story. And I know there's got to be a lot of plastering contractors listening. I got to tell you, a lot of them don't like to go out on a job site with me because you find out they don't really know anything about plaster. They've never put a lath or plaster, so they don't know. They don't understand.
That's
and
right.
They don't want to go out there. They want to just sit in this bubble and talk about it and go in theory. And my thing back to Dr. Seabrook, I remember he wrote an article once about he figured out the problem with stucco, and he actually wrote it. He goes, this was back in the 90s, and this is how I actually got to meet him. And I read it and I went, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you how I can, without boring going into it, he wrote when he found the problem was he was naming it on a specific product because he found out in his research that this product was brand new to the market and it came along the same time. And I went, okay, I got to tell you, I started in the industry in 1975. And my family had already been using that product since 1952.
Right.
And I found out the patent on it and the invention of it was 1939. So you can't say that was the problem. And so I called him, we talked, and he went, oh, I didn't know that. And I said, I know you don't know that.
You mentioned that with regards to going to the job sites with everything, how somebody in our organization at Masterwall, we talk about this all the time. Why is it that when everybody comments to us, they've been doing this for 30 years, right? It's always the aspect, right, Grant? Everybody's been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing it like this for 30 years.
And I've never seen this problem in 30 years.
And I've never seen this problem. Exactly. And so it's that part of it to where you tied some of this, I will say, into code. You talked about the ASTM and you're on the ASTM. I do want to make sure beforehand, getting into either some of the questions, but also the 7 modules that you're coming up with for education. But one of the things I think is really key when we talked about code last week and you go to the job site, let's say you're there for some issue, and code is not always the end all of end alls, right? We talked about that to where alternatives, you said section 104, the alternatives to design and construction. And I know we only got about 10, 11 more minutes, but kind of talk about code when it comes to the stucco world, because it is vast, it's huge, and it is the baseline, but it's not the only thing. And most of these applicators, they don't know code.
And you're right, Brian. And when it comes to code and defects and whatever like that, and this is a world I lived in, so I know it pretty well. And it's much more complex, and it's hard to go over real quickly. And as a contractor, I remember of course, I lived under the Uniform Building Code, and it got transferred. Now it's all over the International Building Code. And what happened was, just real quickly, is that we used to have 3 model building codes across the United States. The UBC, the 3 models: West, South, and then the East. And then it was all in the 1990s. By 2000, they formed the International Code. The idea was we're going to make one code cover all the country. Which, okay, that's fine, and allow for whatever. Well, what happened was at least on the Uniform Building Code, is that it got it was very prescriptive. I mean, it told you do this, do that. That went away, and then they brought in the International Building Code, which became more performance based. Well, then somebody noticed, we now lost all that prescription in there. We lost all the standard. Well, ASTM had a standard, and they've had a 1063 and 926 have been around forever, and they've been kind of left there, and they're good. They were always by us considered, like me and the plastering, that was more of a commercial one, because it was, in fact, the beginning of 1063 dealt with suspended cold roll channel lath and plaster ceilings. Geez, there's not enough of those to even worry about hardly.
Right.
And half the document was about that. So then that sort of changed everything. And getting what you were saying, so now we have it's a little bit, it got referenced in there, so it kind of goes all over the place, and it's gotten more and more confused. And the one thing, and I think what you were trying to get to is that a lot of people feel like, well, if the code says this, then that's what we have to do. And I understand that. I get that. But you do know the code, and even ASTM can't cover everything. It just can't. I mean, you guys out there laughing and plastering, no, you run into situations, you could say, well, what's the code say about that? And I can tell you a lot of things, not really much. I mean, it's sort of a gray area. There's tons of that, because I don't think there's any trade out there that's more variations and, options and regional practices. In fact, like you said earlier, I did terrazzo. They think they have all that. I'm kind of, no, you don't. No, because I tell you, a terrazzo job in LA is not any different than New York than it is in Miami. Not really. I mean, there's so minimal differences. With ours, wow. If I took a plasterer out of Miami, Florida, and put him here to Southern California, you'd be like, you need to kind of, we do things a lot differently here.
Yeah, big difference. Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's not bad or good. That's just the way it is.
That's right. Well, we talked about that with the pumping part of it too. I mean, the Northeast pumping is unheard of. I mean,
but even some of the practices. And so now getting back to the code part, and I know you wanted to bring this up because this is what I've been doing defect litigation stuff. A lot of people will bring up and say, well, that's not code compliant. And I would say, well, actually, the only one that can really tell you whether it's code compliant is the building official.
Yeah.
And how that works is, and getting back to, I said, all the variations, somebody has to be in charge. I think everybody can agree with that. I mean, it isn't, we just don't throw it up in the air like, well, let's just pick. I mean, as much as the building envelope consultants and gurus want to tell you that, and they make up what they want to say, and by the way, that's what really ticks me off, is that when they start making things up or interpreting it their way. Any of you guys that have ever been involved in any lawsuits, or whether when they come up with the control joints and they start coming at you for that, that's what they do. They start interpreting it the way they want. And I'd say, and I always go, the one who gets to make the ultimate determination is the building official. And that's not by me saying, that's not just me saying, so that actually has to do with, in fact, I'll embarrass, I'll put it, here's the, this is actually the California version, but it's the International Building Code.
That's right.
In the building, and that's volume 1. There's actually 3 volumes if you think about it. By the way, think about how big that is. So anyway, but section 104, which is in chapter 1, is called Administration and Scope of Duties. Nobody reads that, because who would want to read chapter 1 as like the boring, administration duties. But section 104, I use it all the time because it probably has more to do with anything than anybody. Because what it says right there, it's titled Alternative Materials and Methods of Means of Construction Design and Material, blah, blah. And what what it says, I'm paraphrasing, is that this code, and it says this code is not meant to handcuff you to do only this and only that. It makes it very clear that we want to open. And like I tell people, we don't live in Nazi Germany. This is the United States of America. We want to explore new ideas. We want to do that. That might even wonder, because you wonder, well, how did the building department let that go? Well, they could say a popsicle stick is fire rated if they wanted to. They're not going to do that, of course. Right. We know that. But that's how things that may not be prescriptive to the code are put in there. And how that can help is like, I think probably one of the most famous ones that I've got, like you said, the stucco resource guide that we did, and also the plaster and drywall manual I did, and also it's on the SMA website, is that we always say the weep screed has to be 4 inches above soil and 2 inches above paved surfaces. I think every plastering contractor gets that. Well, you come to a job site, and if you're like me, I'm sure you come out and you go, they've poured the concrete. There's no 2 inches.
That's right.
There's hardly anything there.
Yeah.
Now what do you do?
Yeah. And what do you do with it?
Yeah, we have a detail that we can help make. We did it in Seattle. I not only drew it, but we actually did it, and I modified it, and we used it a lot in Seattle. And how it works is you just get the building department looks at it, and then if that building official says, yeah, that you can do that,
then it's okay. And that's where I'm going to jump right into, I'm going to share the screen again and allow you to even talk through a little bit of why I think the education, right? That's one of the reasons we're doing all this, right? Educated.
Yes.
But I do think that, I mean, look, AWCI has the EIFS doing it right. We encourage people to take that class. I mean, I hope that people are doing it more and more. I think live is better, but what you've also done with the SMA is started to do this whole thing as far as having 7 modules. Let me go to that one slide there. This is just kind of like the manufacturers and stuff. laughing plaster. Here it is, right? Here's your training certification of the modules that somebody can go through so that when they're on the job site, they are educated enough to say, hey, I have gone through this process. I know what I'm talking about. And yes, the building official needs to approve this. And this is the best option in this situation. But if they have this background, speak a little bit about the module, because I think this educational piece will be good, not just for applicators. I think spec writers and architects and engineers and sales rep, if they go through this, they're going to have a baseline of understanding of what this looks like.
Thank you for bringing that up, Brian, because yes, and this goes back to when I said that when I brought to the ASTM committees and groups, and I said, you guys all know that the science is great and all that, but what's really missing, and I even talked to plastering contractors, and they always tell me, they said, these young guys just don't seem to know plastering like we did when we were young, when we got into it. And I go, yeah, you're right. And I was one of those guys. I always want to know, why do we do that? Why are we using this heart float? Why don't we do this? Why, how? Not just, well, the code says this, the code says that. Yeah. And it's great to know the code. I'm not knocking that. That's great. But once again, I'm going to divert just a little bit. If you think that's absolute protection, you're wrong.
That's
because what you get sued for is, I'm not going to say you don't, for violating code, you do. That's usually how to assign blame, but it's damages. So if you don't create damages, your insurance company is going to, because that's exactly how it works. The insurance company doesn't come out and go, oh, you violated code, we're going to cover you on that. By the way, they won't.
Right.
So they don't. What they do is they go, you damaged that person, so we'll cover his damages on it.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole thing is. So my point was I talked to the SMA board, and they agreed with me. They said, you're right. We got to make sure we don't do any damage. Plus, I want to make sure that when there is damage, that fairness is actually appointed, because plastering contractors so much of the time get blamed for something that's not their fault. That happens so often. Anyway, but it starts right with the guys in the field knowing what they're doing. So what we came up with, the board and I, we worked it out. We came up with 7 modules of training. Modules 1 and 2 are for lathing. Modules 3 through 5 are plastering. Module 6 is supervision, and module 7 is for inspections. Now, when I said all of these modules are 30 minutes long, they're online video, and we've already gotten I can already tell you they're about ready to be launched too. Modules 1 through 5 are in English and Spanish. They're videos. You watch them, you get the link, you click onto it, you look at it, and it's 30 minutes. They're 30 minutes a piece. Yes, they cover what the code says, and I'll tell you, when it comes to the lathing and plastering guys, it's basic stuff. This, like I said, 1 through 5 is for the field workers. They're the ones that we envision. Your workers, you could have a room and say, hey guys, let's everybody watch this. This week we're going to have pizza Friday or whatever, and for 30 minutes we're going to watch this. And it's not just standing there going, the code says attach the last 7 inches on center.
That's right.
We can all do that. This is why you do that. This also talks about why you flash. And we actually have some things flashed. We have videos in there showing them some basics. We have some things that are done wrong and say why, to think about why this was done this way. Plastering, why do we hard float the brown coat? Why do we use a brown float? Why not just use a sponge green float to float the brown? And we explain why. We explain why sands are supposed to be. If you think about the old guys, and I'm sure there's some old guys out there, we used to be able to go up and grab sand and squeeze it by our hand and go, yeah, this is good plaster sand. I remember people go, how can you tell just by doing that? When you know, you sort of know. So then once you get through with that, if we get that, then the supervisor one, that's going to be one that's, and we're going to have tests. There'll be a test afterward. And if somebody wants to get a certification of completion of it, they can take the test and they can say, yes, I passed that. I passed that. Because we think the apprenticeship, we just lost it. So we've got to get something back out there. The supervisor one is the one you were just showing the certificate of. That's actually for the supervisor. When he gets it, that's a very extensive test. And that's for the guy who actually, he should know the lathing. Because if you're going to supervise these guys, you got to know how to lath. You have to know how to plaster. You may not have to be a plasterer or a lather, but you certainly got to know what they got to do and why they're doing it. And then we also get into some litigation stuff for protection and document and record keeping, so that they go, okay. And if you're a contractor, you go, you know what? And I thought about this because I was a licensed contractor. I'd like my guys to know how important it is to document things, to write things down. And we go through actual examples to show them. Once that's done, then they can get a certificate for that. And then what we're hoping to do, and this isn't still, I don't know if I have any board members on, but we would like to have certified SMA plastering contractors, because I deal with people all around the country, builders, owners. They want stucco, or, you know, they want it, but they go, I'm a little bit nervous. How do I pick? You know, how do I know this guy knows what he's doing? And I said, and I go, I don't know. Well, one way we could do it is if you had a certification that you had that, it could show, you could show your owner builder, look, we've got this class we went through, we learned. And it can also help you, like on the sand thing, you know. Actually, I'll give a better one, is that we talk about the hardness of stucco. If you've got any old plasterers that have been around, and any stucco guys that are listening right now, they'll tell you that if you've been involved in litigation, there's a way to test for hardness of stucco with a petrographic analysis and all these. You don't need to do that. You just need a nail test. And when the SMA says that, and we put that in writing, and we can actually verify that, the nail test is just, any guys are going, we just take a nail and go and scratch the front of it. It's hard. It's hard. I don't need to know the PSI and all that. That's not, and we can back you up on that. Yeah. So,
and this is the part where I think the organizations that we are, you know, with the SMA, it's valuable because of the education that we have to show everybody out there. Because yes, we're going to get asked those questions. We're going to have those comments come up on the job site. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're doing. And it's, I mean, look, you talked about it last week. I'll mention it now as we end here briefly, but you know, reverse lap. How many times we still to this day, and that's not even dealing with stucco or EIFS, right? But we see people reverse lapping paper on a building, and you think that's the most common, simplest thing somebody should know by now. But the education training of the younger generation is something that we have missed. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. The apprenticeship that we have not, you know, really held on to. And that's one of those things I really wanted to promote within this whole piece. Hey, I appreciate your time. Grant, did you have any questions from you specifically? I don't know if you had anything. Otherwise, I'll go to one thing as far as questions up here real quick from Brad. We'll go over a little bit of 11 o'clock just because I know we started a little late, and then we'll end here maybe after this one question. But Grant, did you have anything?
No, I was just going to say Mark's the best dressed guest we've had so far. Looking sharp on a Monday morning. I know it's early out there. So
it's early. I know it.
You did good cleaning up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I still my beard. I normally, like, I think you saw the picture. I mean, I just decided there's guys that, I'm like everybody else. I'm shaving is not a priority for me.
It's the COVID beard. That's right.
The COVID beard. So Mark, here's the one question. I think this is a great one too. If at reference to ASTM 1063, we know that laths should be cut, not continuous, where control joints are installed. So why are there so many projects done where control joints are installed on top of the lath? This part of the ASTM 1063 has really not changed over 30 years, yet so many are still doing stucco wrong. What are some of the consequences from the installations with continuous lath beneath the control joints?
Okay, that's a great question. And
it is.
Whoever asked that, you're right. That has been going on for decades. In fact, I think I first sat on the committee in the early 90s, and it's been argued ever since. Okay, so here's the deal. A control joint, we have a difference between an expansion joint and a control joint. A control joint is a one-piece joint that's meant for minimal amount of movement and usually in one direction only. Expansion joint is something that's two-piece that telescopes and moves all over. Historically on the West Coast, over lath, we just put our control joints over lath. And we've done that for years. And so then it wasn't until ASTM became, remember I said, and when it became in 2000, kind of brought into the international code. And now I said, well, that's the code, the way it says to do it. Well, there are literally thousands of buildings done with the control joint over the lath. And remember, and this actually, I'm glad we went through that part about the building official, because here's what happens. And if you get sued and somebody says you put it over the lath, that's wrong. The code says that. Well, the code, remember, the one who gets to make the decision is the building official. Mm-hmm. And I've done this in depositions. March that building official in here and get him to tell me that we're wrong about that. And I'll go, yep, we're wrong. Now picture this. And this has happened. I can tell you in the city of Seattle and Bellevue, those guys, I was the regular instructor in that, and they would call them and say, yeah, Mark, we're getting a letter here. They want us to say it's wrong. And I go, well, and you know, with those resource guides that I told you, we did it. We allowed that. That's an acceptable alternative. So he would go, and I said, you know, I'm okay with it. We do it all the time. It works. It's meant for minimal amount of movement. It's like a score line in your concrete walkway.
Sure.
Now, the point is, so then that's the idea. And my analogy, my example is this. It's a little bit of an analogy is when the building official, if you could bring him in, they never do, but if you could bring him in, you got to remember they're doing this. Mr. Building Official, you allowed that to go. We need you to accept guilt for it, and we need you to say that that was installed and your inspector missed it, and we're going to do all that. Meanwhile, I'm in the background going, I've got your back.
Yeah.
Who do you think he's going to go with? I'm going to tell you that is 100% of the time they've actually said, yeah, no, we accept that. And that's because we have a book out there puts it. Now, from the question, it sounded like the person thinks it's wrong and when are we going to learn to do it right? That's a variation, that's a regional practice, and it's done that way. And I think we have to accept that because there are things that are done in Florida that California guys go, well, you can't do it. Yeah, you can. And we have to be, I think that's one thing we as an industry have to do. We have to recognize other people's analysis. I'm not, in fact, if you came to me and said, Mark, I want that, and I've had this happen, Mark, I want to cut the lath behind the control joint every time. I'm not stopping you from doing that. Yeah. Do it. Of course, do it. Make sure you got framing back there because if you don't, you've got problems. And that's exactly why we came up with a lot of times that control joint is drawn on there, and this happens all the time. The architect comes out and goes, yeah, I don't want it there. I want to move it there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we got to tear all the lath off. We got to tear the sheathing off, and you got to reframe the wall. What the, you got to be, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, we can put it over the lath.
And that's where I think, like you said, the design part of this makes a difference when it comes to be smart, minimal movement, a lot of movement. If you know the lay of the land, if you know what the substrate are, if you know this building is going to move a lot, you may be more inclined to, even if it is okay with a control joint, you might say, you know what, you really need to put an expansion joint in there and really discuss that part of it. And as much as, Brad, I know the question you're asking because I've seen this myself, but I think that one specific on control joint as to compared to expansion joints and how that gets done, continuous lath or not, I think is much more a line of what you've been saying, Mark, on let's be smart about this. Let's talk about it. Now, let me go with this next thing though, what Leo says, explaining the difference between 10,000 staples on the lath of the wire versus wire ties. Now, this one is a little bit different because it is very specific and for a very specific reason why the fastening of either the wire and or control or expansion joints is 6 to 7 inches on framing members, right, of the lath, not within the field. And that's what we see a lot of times. At least I know I do. I think this is what Leo's referring to is we see staples on the lath, like 10,000 staples for like 5 pieces of wire, right? But that is very specific to framing members, correct?
Yes, it is. The idea of the code was NASTM. Their intent is to attach the lath to the frame, to the wall by using it along the framing members. The vertical lines, whatever spacing the framing is, at 6 to 8 inches on center to go up and down, not in the field. And ASTM even specifically says that an occasional fastener between frame members is okay because sometimes you get a bulge and maybe you got to tack it down and that's fine. The reason they like to do that is, first of all, is that if you're going to have any wood-based sheathing, it's not a solid framing member. The sheathing, in fact, it's been very clarified by ASTM 1063 that it's not considered a framing member. Mm-hmm. That's arguable. I'm not going to want to argue with people about it, but that's their opinion. I can tell you that that's what they take. So the idea is to get the secure attachment. That's one. Also, water penetration, because if it goes through the framing member, it's going to be more secure. It's going to be in there. If it's wood framing, it's going to be sealed all the way, rather than a puncture through the sheathing. Even though I don't think that's a big reason, it is part of it. And then the other thing is the furring. Because all these laths, or 90% of them, are self-furred. So that means they have dimples in them. If you just staple it all down, I look at it like putting in a 6x6 rebar in your concrete driveway. Would you go and take all those blocks out and push it down into the sand and say, now pour the concrete on? My rebars, well, what good did it do? You didn't have it in the lath. So that's why you attach on. We find out that, and that's what, and I don't think the code is ever going to change from that. I just don't think they'll get that. It'll stay, and I think that's fine. And I don't have any I don't have any issue with that because it's just attached on the frame member. If I walk on a job and somebody's got, like I said, a fastener here and there between, that's okay. I don't get freaked out about that. But that's why, did that
absolutely answer? No, I think that's great. I'm going to tie this and bring it over to Dennis your friend, I know you and Dennis know each other and have talked quite often. He is, your thoughts on continuous insulation in stucco and how the CI is coming to play and what you think about that.
I've known Dennis a long, long time.
I know you.
Is
So
he gonna,
what do you, so that's his question. Yeah. So any thoughts on continuous insulation in the
Oh,
stucco? Yeah, that's what he's
okay.
asking.
Yeah, I do. Continuous insulation has become a big deal because of that. And here's the thing that we as the stucco industry should be very proud of this. First of all, we have two proven code compliant systems that have been out there for a long, long time. EIFS, because here's the other thing. When you talk about stucco, and I want to jump real quick on that, because this with the continuous insulation, as the stucco guy and the people I get calls from architects and builders around the country going, hey, I got this CMU block wall and I want to put foam on it and hard coat stucco, 3 coats of stucco on a CMU block wall, and I'm going to do this building. My plastering contractor doesn't want to do it. He's saying, and I go, yeah, I agree with the plastering contractor. You're nuts. Mm-hmm. I'd be the first one to tell you, well, what should I do? Do eaves. Why would you not do eaves on that? That's what it was built and designed for continuous installation on block. Now, the other system that we have that's proven is the one-coat systems were developed in the 70s for overframing. And what that is it's got a tongue and groove EPS foam, and then they put a metal lath on that, and then they put 1 coat of cementitious stucco and then a finish over that. And that works really well, and that's code compliant. On with 3-coat, you can do continuous insulation with 3-coat. There's caveats with that. And the ASTM allows that because it says right in there under, I can't remember, I think it's 926 says that it can be applied over rigid insulation backing. So it says you can do it. The problem is we don't have a lot of details for 3-coat. And I would say if a plastering contractor came to me and said, I got a 3-coat stucco job, they want me to do it, and we're getting a lot of those with the CI. Okay, you really want to make sure you look at those details carefully. You feel comfortable about those details. Make sure the architect to sign off on those, because it's not like a 1-coat or an EIFS where you have a manufacturer that's got all these details and they can help you, and you've got to, and if something goes wrong, because that's not, it's prescriptive. It's not, it's generic. It's generic, meaning it's sort of a system you put together out there. You could have some liability on that. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know Dennis, and Dennis, you can come on here if you want to a little bit, and you share your thoughts too. We can even bring this topic up in July when you come on here in the first week in July. But I think it is definitely one of those pieces. There's Dennis, my buddy.
Hey, I'm not as well dressed.
You look a lot better.
This is a preemptive, hey, this is a preview of next week with Dennis coming on as our technical guy. So welcome to it, Dennis. But yeah, so why, go ahead, Dennis, why did you ask that specific to Mark too?
Well, Mark knows the industry really well. Yes. So to get his thoughts on it, I think add a lot of credibility to how these products should be installed. And I'm with him. I really don't care for insulated stucco. Even though we have to do it as the architect spec out.
And the more and more as we get into the architect part of it, it also becomes that energy code thing to where when they want that hard coat stucco, for whatever reason, they're just stuck on, hey, we want wire scratch and brown, but we need that insulation. Where are we going to put it? Okay, well, this is the alternative that we can give to you is, here's what we have when it comes to detailing. But I agree, it's a very modge podge of systems, because I know I've asked Dennis multiple times what screw fasteners are the ones that we're supposed to recommend, because we're not the manufacturer of the screw. What's the pull-out strength? What's the shear strength of that screw and fastener to hold it from 2? And then sometimes these architects will say, well, I want 4 inches of foam. And it's like, okay, well, now you're 4 inches outside of that structure, and what's that going to do? So it's definitely an interesting area for sure.
And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about, and I've had a lot of people tell me, gee, Mark, all you focus on is defect litigation and court cases. But I kind of think, well, if every job went perfectly fine, you got paid all your money and everybody was happy, well, you don't even need an association in a sense, you know what I mean? So it's usually when things go bad, isn't it true? Isn't it that 1 out of 10 job that goes bad, the one that takes all your attention? It's like, oh my God, it drives you just about crazy. I've been a plastering contractor, so I know that. And if you have something like what you just said about the fastener and all that, if it's a generic 3-coat stucco and you're doing it, you're going to have to, you and the consultant are going to have to sit there and work it out. And you're going to have to do all this. Whereas if it's a 1-coat stucco, which over foam, you have the manufacturer that can help you with that. And they sort of can give you some buy-in, and they have data that they can use, or EIFS is even better because they do that. What I'm getting to is, because as you know, your guys in the field never are perfect. It's just, that's just a reality.
So there's a guy actually, I'm going to interrupt just because I think this will tie into this. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ranzani, is that correct?
It's Flavio.
Okay, Flavio. So go ahead. So Flavio, you said you had a question where it comes to XPS or EPS because you've had problems with XPS. Go ahead and explain that a little bit.
Yeah, we have made bad experiences with XPS under 3-coat stucco. Much better experiences with EPS and the XPS, because we think the mass almost explodes with heat. All the heat that burns on the facade will be on the surface of the insulation layer, and we had enormous bowing of that insulation layer, and it's hard enough so that it cracks the stucco.
Interesting.
Danke, Flavio. Alles gut, ja?
Yeah.
Mein Schweizer Freund.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I've experienced, and Flavio, you're right. I had the same thing. When I see XPS under stucco, I get like, I start to cringe a little, like, oh no, okay. And I'll tell you what I think. It's funny because I think that here. Let me start with why I like EPS so much under foam, under stucco. The EPS is it's the softer white foam that we're talking about. It acts like a little bit of a shock absorber. So it has some give, just like what Flavio said with the metal lath, it maybe expands and contracts, the building moves. It has a little bit of give to it. Now, and the XPS is much more rigid. So, but then somebody could say, and this is a good point, well, wait a minute, Mark. We got wood-based sheathing. It's even more rigid than that. We got this, and I agree with all that. But here's one thing. If you've ever gone to an XPS wall if you put all the XPS up on, go up and put your thumb up to it or take and start tapping on it like that. Just start tapping. You can feel the vibration all the way down 10 feet away. You can feel it. It's like I always live, it's like a drum, it's the skin of a drum. And I think that's what creates kind of a problem for some of the XPS. Because I agree with Flavio. I got to tell you, when it's XPS, I'm not against XPS. It's great and all that, but I get a little bit nervous because of that. And I have always thought that had a little to do with it. I don't know if there's science reasons about expansion and contraction. There might be.
Interesting.
I think it has to do with if you just go up to an XPS and sit there and it's, or even the polyiso, some of those. I mean, and I'll tell you what I've done when I've been involved with jobs like that. I always say, if you're going to do that, you should put a base and mesh on it, because at least make sure it's really well secured to the framing, and then put a base and mesh over your brown coat. If I were a plastering contractor and some consultant said, I want to do XPS or a different foam, I would say I would only do that. I mean, I would, if they didn't let me put a base and mesh on and pay me, and by the way, they should pay you for doing that, then I want a letter that I'm going to make you acknowledge that this could be a problem. And I mean, not a failure problem, just it might
right.
crack.
I know, Dennis, I know that I've asked you sometimes when it comes to the systems that we have out there right now, as far as showing the details, whether it's for ours, right, roller shield, the foam, paper, wire, scratch, and brown. And I've always asked that question to you a few times, where it's, why are we putting the paper in front of the foam and not behind the foam, and all that kind of thing. And that might make a difference, Flavio. I don't know, in the system that you had the issues with, if your mud was directly touching to the foam specifically or not. That, again, just thinking through on the scientific side of this. But I definitely, I wrote it down to kind of even ask some of the XPS people that we know, like, hey, is there a reason why chemically this might make a difference? Because I think we have seen, in doing this show now for a few months, we've seen the amount of scientific chemical things that get brought up in all of the products and systems that we do is a huge, huge part of this. So I'll definitely look to see it, as far as that goes. Real quick, though, I want to backtrack real quick. Because of, we talked about the staples, right? Frame your members into staples and not just overall and just shooting them anywhere, though there might be some loose, interpretation of how that looks. but also specifically in ASTM, we talk about wire tying control joints and things like that, expansion joints in that wall system, and not stapling those to the actual wall, but wire tying them. Do you think that the wire tying of those control joints and expansion joints is necessary? I mean, it is in code, so we talked about what code looks like, but is that really necessary, or is it okay that, hey, they take their staple gun and pop a few staples into the control joint and or expansion joint?
You know, I think it's okay to just fasten it because it's going to move with the framing anyway. So I don't see that as being a big deal. I have no problem with wire tying. And I certainly prescribe that. That's great. If I walked on a job and I saw them where they stapled or screw fastened the control joint to the framing, okay, that's fine. I mean, I got that, doesn't bother me. I've not see that become an issue. There are areas where wire tying would be, and not that this maybe Flavio runs into this in Texas. I know in California we have stucco parapet caps. Yes, those I want wire tied. And the reason I want those wire tied is I don't want that nail penetrating through the top of the parapet if it's got a stucco parapet. Because we do stucco parapets, and you can do them, and they can work. But you just don't want any penetrations through this. So there are times when you do want to wire tie. And I can't think of any others on the top of my head, but there might be another time when you're looking at it. And that's kind of what I'll tell you, when you look at our modules that we do, the lathing, that's what I do is we wrote it, we kind of go through it, we walk with a lather, and he gets some interesting situations. We want them to think about these things because, and what we, by the way, just so you contractors know, it isn't the, hey, you lather, you make the decision. If you know it's right, you do it. No. You go talk to your boss.
Yeah.
You go talk to your contractor, your supervisor. When you see something, you have a question, you should ask them. And then you should discuss it. And then guess what? You do what he tells you to do. Because you as the contractor take all the liability. If he tells you to put that lath up with bubble gum, then that's what you do. Because he's your boss. Now, he won't do that, of course, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. One thing too, I mean, I think that's a huge part about doing the education piece, because we're giving that knowledge to them so that they're educated on the job site. They're not just a dumb applicator, right? Like that's what we need to get away from, that these people are smart. Jess has one question. Jess, you said, can you speak to the pros or cons about EPS being more porous than XPS for water infiltration? One thing I'll mention to that, though, is a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about EPS and XPS and stuff like that, Grant had gotten, I don't know if you can get it into the chat room, Grant, or not, but the aspect of, an XPS company will show their data to show theirs is less porous and better for that, whereas the same kind of study from the EPS will show the opposite way. So I do understand, Jess, what you're saying in the question specific of, is one better than the other, that we would see on the job site for the CI and stucco. But I also will acknowledge that the XPS and EPS manufacturers kind of show same results. Grant, I don't know if you want to tie into what you had showed that day to that.
Well, they just kind of seem to use the data either way to their advantage.
Yeah.
It's you can't get a real picture of that from either side, from the EPS manufacturers or the XPS manufacturers.
Yeah.
They're both kind of taking data and turning it into their favor.
Yeah.
I can go back and find those and repost them in the chat. Maybe I'll do that, and we can use that as a reference. I'll do that right now.
Use that as a reference, because I think there's benefits to both, depending on where you are, especially depending on the systems, is what my thought would be. I don't know, Mark, if you have or anything on there, or even Dennis for that matter at this point.
No, I agree with you. I think that I think you got to be open-minded. You got to look at these things. It's not there. And I know as a salesman for a manufacturer of one type of cladding system or whatever wants to always promote that. I get that, but maybe that's not always right. It's in fact, when you talk about the test, Grant, you're right. If you look at the vapor permeability, the vapor permeability transmission rate for weather-resistant barriers, I've been involved in that for years and years, and it's exactly what you said there. It's like they just, wait a minute, how do you come up with a vapor transmission rate of 35, but over there's a 65, and it's the numbers are all over the place, and I realize they're using different tests, whether it's the dry cup method, the wet cup method, whether they use the hot box. I mean, there's all these different methods they use, and sometimes it's like, well, you're just kind of doing a test to make it look like you're, and whatever. And
Yeah.
so that kind of goes on. So it's not just the phone people that have done this. And I understand that. And I want to get back to what I said about what one system may not be perfect for everything. And I actually think that's why I have a good reputation with the architectural community, because they'll call me up and they'll tell me, yeah, I want to do this and blah, blah. And I go, well, okay, tell me what kind of building we're talking about. Well, we're doing it's an elementary, no, I got a better one. And I've actually had this happen. Well, it's a junior high school stadium, a junior high school football stadium, and we're going to put eaves on it. And I go, you really want to put eaves on a junior high school 6 feet down? Are you crazy? Do you know what it's going to look like when they get through it? Because just like on the other hand, then I could turn, and then I remember going, yeah, but you told me last week that we should use eaves. That was over the CMU block, and you had a different type of building. There's no one particular product, whether it's stucco, eaves, one coat stucco, whatever. They've all, and I actually think that's where the plastering contractor needs to be well versed at these things. And you know what? For the most part, I think they are. They are,
absolutely. I think that's very true.
And I want to let them know that that's where we can help you. And by the way, because they're always thinking, they're always thinking, he's doing this because he makes more money at this or whatever. No, generally they're doing it because they know that's the better system for your building. And I'll help you with that. Even if you tell me, and by the way, I've had this happen. I've had an architect say, well, I can't believe you're telling me to use eaves. You represent the stucco industry. I want you to get the right product for your building.
Yeah. And a lot of times that comes down to that applicator, because if that applicator has never done stucco, and he's done eaves, he might be sitting there saying, yeah, use that high impact mesh. That's going to hold up for it. And he says, I could do stucco, but I haven't done stucco before, and I'm really not versed in it. So you hired me to do it. This is what I'm going to do. And vice versa, the opposite, right? Compared to a stucco guy who says, I can do eaves, but I'm not so familiar with it when it comes in that play. So, well, hey, Mark,
that's a fair statement. Very fair statement.
I appreciate your time. Again, this has been great. I love the questions. I love the comments. We do have those two things in there just for you to look at and kind of research on your own as well. And obviously, if you have any other questions, definitely let us know. But definitely thank you so much for your time. It's been great for sure. I know Brad's got another question, but Stuart, you can go ahead and stop. We'll see everybody in July. Look for the invite